Drink for the day. Tropic Thunder.
Mango Mayhem. Cheers.
Podcast number 2.
Woohoo! We made it. That means we're really doing this thing.
So
All
far.
right. Yeah. So on to week 2. A lot of this week is about loving God first. So putting God above all else, above your spouse, family, everything. We're supposed to be leading our life with loving God at the top, Him being our priority. So one thing that this kind of made me think of when I was reflecting back is a lot of how our society is being led right now with a big push for self-care, taking care of yourself. And the world's just not doing so hot. I think a lot of just relationships in general are struggling. Friendships aren't as strong. Communities aren't as strong. Marital relationships aren't as strong anymore. And I think this has a big part to do with it. People are putting their own desires above everything else. And, if you're looking at the totem pole of importance, it's supposed to be God, your relationship with your spouse, family, then community. Whereas nowadays it's like we're putting ourselves at the top, then, whatever else follows, but that's going to lead to total failure, which is what I think we're really seeing a huge part of right now, just all across the world. There's so much divide between everyone, and I know there's so many other things going on adding to that, but I think a huge part of it is because we're also not putting God first. Our priorities are so jacked up. And there's also a huge push for giving into those fleshly desires. We are supposed to, deprive ourselves. We're not supposed to give into all of our worldly, fleshly desires. And that's also a big part of this, self-care push that's going on. And I think it's causing a lot of harm. And so there's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself. We do need to make sure that we're healthy and those sorts of things. But putting your spouse and friendships and community, obviously God comes first. But, as a priority is going to make a huge difference in how your life looks. So that was a lot of what I got just from day 1, because it's all about love is best when God is first. And I really think life is best when God is first. And so this week we'll walk us through kind of what that looks like in different areas and how it affects our lives. Sorry for the rant. I just really was feeling that when I read day 1.
Yeah, I thought we were going to be talking to each other, and you're just talking to them.
I know, sorry.
So, try to keep things a little more organized this time. Shorten it up, because apparently that's the number one criticism coming from you guys, is that our podcast is too long. But I think that's kind of what we like to watch anyway, or what we like to listen to is the longer form. So
yeah.
Hopefully we'll be cutting this up. At the very least, we'll probably add some timestamps for each day. And then maybe if feeling froggy, we'll actually split it up. Have separate videos for each day too. So that maybe you can
kind of take the golden nuggets out and make that, its own little 5-10 minute video or something, so that people can have a couple more options rather than just a full hour, which I'm not going to guarantee it won't be this time, but we're going to try.
So yeah, basically the dare for this week was to prioritize, create, just a couple minutes at least each day to read the Bible, meditate on the Word, pray, think about God. We kind of do that already, so that was wasn't too hard. Maybe just try to, do a bit more, I suppose. But then, and hence why we're doing this whole podcast, is sort of to make, give us even more focus in the right direction, right? Because like I've said before, discipline, where you put your work, where you put your effort, that's what you're going to care about.
Yeah.
And so I think that the stuff that I took sort of from day one is, sort of the conversation about sort of modern day idolatry is all about ourselves and or our spouse, right? Like you're supposed to really, you got to love your spouse with everything and you forget about God. And so then your spouse becomes the idol, or you become the idol, or
your children,
or other people
yeah.
do as well, right? Sometimes that's the struggle for some people is like, oh no, I would much rather spend time on this thing than something else. And then, on God. And so by focusing on God, everything else just kind of falls into place because it provides you, even if you get rid of the whole, faith-based part of it, it gives you a disciplined ideal and a mission and goal and moral framework to sort of work from. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I took, like where I was putting my thoughts. Maybe that's because of some of the stuff that I've been paying attention to recently or whatever. And, some of the other podcasts that maybe I've been listening to, but specifically looking at it, even if you take away all of the like faith parts of Christ, right? And you just look at it from a logical standpoint and, psychological sort of how we understand the human mind and so on. This week's really good for that because I think it helps us to understand why this is so powerful and why the Bible and God and, Christ makes such a big difference in your life. And just this sort of truth, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So
I do have a couple more nuggets from day one. Day one was like my longest, so whenever you're
okay.
ready.
So my last thing was I'm all about always going after the best possible thing I can. I don't really...
Yeah.
You make fun of me all the time.
Lars does not
she says I'm
halfway
extra,
anything.
But it's...
Yeah.
But it's because I want to know that the thing I'm going after is the most true thing. And going to make sure that we are prepared for whatever it is, or that what I'm doing is going to be the most beneficial thing. And what I really liked sort of from day one was they kind of just talked about how, like, love and God's love specifically is the greatest thing in the greatest way for the greatest one. So if you're loving God first, you're doing the greatest thing in the greatest way for the greatest person, for the greatest existence,
Yeah.
right?
That's another t-shirt idea. Bam. Greatest, say it again.
Greatest thing, greatest way, greatest one.
Yeah.
And so I really liked that sort of, I'm obviously paraphrasing that but I really liked that and sort of that spoke to me because that's just sort of who I am, right? And one of the reasons why this path initially took me, right, before I even really had an understanding of Christ or faith or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, and really understood the sort of spiritual side of it as well was, why wouldn't I be going after the greatest team possible, right? And that's sort of what I like to talk about. The body of Christ is, right, to me, which is the greatest team I can possibly find. Because as long as everybody is actually genuinely moving towards that goal, being like Christ, and that's the exact team you want every time.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, just, essentially my last little tidbit for, day 8 or day 1 of week 2 is express love with your every breath. And so,
Yeah, I got to work on that.
So do I. But, it's that's the thing too, right, is train how you fight, right, or whatever. And so every day, if I'm focusing on flexing that muscle and getting to the point where, and disciplining myself, eventually it will become as easy as breathing, right? You just got to get there first. And you have to, it takes a lot of focus at first, but eventually you get to, the sort of classical no mind or, sort of martial arts conversation about that or whatever, where, hey, it took a lot of, self-conscious, very obvious, I'm focused on this one thing, but now you can just run and gun, right? You can just do it.
Yeah.
And so it takes time, takes effort, but hopefully one day we'll be to the point where it doesn't.
Yeah, I definitely felt called out reading through this week's stuff, especially day one. Because just reflecting back on this past week, there were so many moments where it was like, that was not really the most loving thing to say or the most loving action to take. And so that's why it's such a good thing to read these books, to have these conversations, to take your notes, to do all the things. Because, if you're not reflecting and kind of processing how you're living your life or pushing yourself to grow, then you are never going to change for the better or learn how to live a more godly life or live the life that God wants you to live.
Yeah.
If you're just going through the motions, kind of leads me into one of the other things that day one made me think about was we have so many believers out there who, what are you writing down?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought you were writing me a note or something.
No,
Okay.
no. I'm taking a note for myself so I don't
Okay.
forget.
So there's so many believers out there, and I'm guilty as well, who we hardly invest any time into God. If we go to church on Sunday, that's the only day of the week that we've really invested time in God. Or, we pray a couple times here and there for a couple minutes, and we wonder why we're not hearing anything from God. Why aren't we seeing anything move or change in our life? And it's like, well, I'm realizing if I'm not putting the time in to hear what God's saying to me, or to really have that conversation with God, or meditate on what I'm praying about, I'm not giving him the time to answer me. Right. Or giving myself the time to hear what he's telling me, or to feel what he's telling me, or to feel where he's trying to lead me. You know what I mean? So we're asking God to do all these things for us, but we're not even giving him the time to do the things for us, or to even see what he's doing for us. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and so much of that is like trust, right? I think one of the hardest things to do, especially depending on the type of person you are, is to just say, okay, I'm going to trust this thing, right? Or I'm going to trust that this is going to be okay. Like I joke all the time that I'm paranoid, and I have because I have a hard time like just accepting things. I want to plan because I know every plan's going to fail, right? And so I want to sort of over plan so that I know plan B, C, D, whatever down the road. And there's so many things where, especially recently, it's kind of funny, but as we've just kind of given ourselves to being like, you know what, we're just going to trust God here because that's the only option realistically. Otherwise we're like, stuck in place.
Yeah.
Right. And we're just going to stay in the same spot for, more time or whatever. Since we've done that, it's kind of crazy how so many things have just fallen into place.
Yeah.
Right. And when I think about my life overall, that seems to be the way it always seems to work. Right, is you have to take these leaps of faith, right? And if you don't do that, if you don't just take this leap of faith, then you're just going to stay stagnant. Yeah. And I think that's one of the, you want to talk about society or today or whatever, how much are we taught to just be stagnant, right? Yeah. You don't make decisions. You're going to do this. Okay, so you go to school until you're 18, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the idea is, okay, well, now we're going to prolong that even more, and you're going to go to more school where they're going to tell you everything you need to do. You have to do all X, Y, and Z classes. You have to do this. You have to do that. And if you mess up, don't worry about it. It's all fine. But then you're still stuck in paying for whatever for that period of time, right? You're stuck in this position where you can't. Taking a leap of faith isn't really an option, or that you've been told so much throughout so much of your formation, right? So much of your, where you're supposed to learn some of that discipline, and now you're 20.
Or critical thinking.
Yeah, I mean now you're 20 plus, you're 22 plus years old, and finally somebody's like, oh, by the way, now you need to figure out how to make your own decisions.
Yeah.
And whoa, that's kind of crazy, right? And so it's, I don't know. We're getting kind of off topic, so
yeah.
But the whole point is that
I do have one more.
Yeah.
Okay. Last thing. So day one also got me thinking about how for a long time I had a really hard time even believing that I loved God. I know that sounds really weird, but it was like I have this person that I know I believe in, but at that time I never really had a relationship with God. You know, I never really felt his presence. But I knew I was supposed to love him, but I almost didn't believe that I did, or didn't even know if I did or not. And something that helped that change for so much for me was, one, investing more time in God, for sure. You know, reading my Bible, actually praying, listening to worship music, singing out loud, worshiping God. But the biggest thing was I would imagine God being there with me. Like I would literally, you know, imagine Jesus was sitting there right next to me while I was doing those things. And it just made it feel so much more real. And that just changed everything for me. And so, you know, when I'm driving in my car or whatever, I imagine Jesus is sitting next to me. But what's crazy is that is real. Like God is with us all the time. Well, you know, you just don't see him, but that is the reality.
So I think we'll get to some of this too, right? Further on in the week. But one of the things that I took from this is that I think it's interesting that you're saying what you're saying, because the big takeaway from this week for me was that, you know, was the whole, like, your spouse is your helper and so on. And if you're focusing on God, you're going to have a better relationship. Mm-hmm. And again, going back to some of the, like, psychology focus, or like even, you know, just being completely scientifically objective or whatever, if you want, because that's how I like to look at this. Because then, I don't know, it's easier to explain to people, I think, and people today at least are more willing to swallow that. And you start to point things out and you go, well, these are truths. You believe X, right, about science or psychology. Well, now I'm going to point to you where this book that has existed for thousands of years has had that answer all along. So did we really learn anything through this psychologist or whatever that brought this up? So I like to go there. But essentially, marriage is a great sort of, Christ is the bridegroom to the church, right? And so think about that. Marriage is the same thing. You're the helper, right? We are each other's helper. And so, yeah, when you're sitting there imagining that Christ is sitting right next to you, well, you have another believer right next to you. And so that helps, you know, we each do. And we have the ability to now help each other grow, right? And sort of see further into that. And so it's this like microcosm of the macro that is God, right? And so it helps us to understand better as we get to understand our relationship together and God, you know, and it goes back and forth, right? Vice versa, where as we understand how our relationship works, we can better understand, we learn new concepts about God, and vice versa, right? As we learn more new concepts about God, we learn how to better deal with our relationship.
Yeah.
And so we kind of get into that later, but you feel like day 8's pretty...
Yeah, I'm good. I said all my things.
Okay. So